Good morning, everyone. This is Lizzie and Justin, and we are turning towards life this morning. This is a Thirdspace project. So Justin and I, as you may know, are part of a collective of wonderful humans, coaches, people, friends who are together in this thing called Thirdspace. And today, and particularly this time in this year, I'm feeling hugely grateful to have this kind of community in our lives. And I'm so very glad to be extending this towards other people too. It feels like there are concentric circles that happen in community, and somehow what got born of our inner concentric circle is now kind of having these bigger ripple effects. And turning towards life is one of those things. So it's one of our deepest wishes to include more and more people in our field so that we can be in these kinds of conversations together with more and more people. And this is really having an impact, and it's really important that we're here. So I want to thank everybody for listening, for watching, for commenting, for being with us, and for having us along for whatever piece of the ride we're along for in your journey as well. Maybe we're being listened to in a car on the way to school, or we're walking with you when you walk your dog, or you're having a bath, or you're in bed, or going for a run, or whatever you're doing. It's so wonderful that we can be with you and join you. And it's such a great thing that we do this every week. And I was thinking this morning, actually, not sure why, but I was thinking about the fact that we've continued to do this now for, I don't know how many years it is, three years. And so in that time, I've had a little baby. And there was one time we pre-recorded some things, and there was one time that we did a pre-record when Vesper, my little one, was born. And I think that, and another time when Justin, one of your children, was going on a plane somewhere and the flight happened to coincide with this, we had another pre-record. But whatever, we haven't missed a week, even if we weren't here live. There were just 2 times we weren't here live, and the rest of the time we've been here live. And I was thinking, so how did I get here 2 weeks after giving birth to a baby? And I was thinking, my goodness, I must really love this. I must have this really high on my agenda of things that I want to do in my life, because that's quite hardcore when I look back. And of course, I have lots of support, and Matthew now is with Vesper, and that really makes it all possible that my husband does that and supports us in this way. But I feel like it's just becoming a deeper and deeper groove and a deeper and deeper rhythm. And I often think, what if we run out of sources? What if we run out of things to say? But then each week something different erupts and something new comes. And so thank you, Justin, for keeping on with your part of the variedness of things, and always having these things to bring to us, and always be reading and thinking and feeling into these different kinds of ways of expressing lots of different things. And of course, that's what I'm doing as well. And it just feels a really welcome thing for us to do. And the fact that we have to come here with some sources, whether it's our own writing or someone else's, it just feels like it's a great motivation to keep looking and keep reading as well. So welcome, everybody. Welcome to you and me, Justin, as well. And thank you for bringing this wonderful source by Rainer Maria Rilke, which I'm so glad to be reflecting on and speaking about with you today.
Thank you for all of that, Lizzie, and welcome, everyone. I'm very tickled by the thought that we are, because of the time-shifting nature of this, Lizzie, that we're live, of course, with a bunch of people on Facebook, but we're also listenable to on the podcast and on our website at any time in the future, so that we are a united collective of people in their baths and walking their dogs and lying in their beds, spread over time and space all over the world, and who knows when. It's an amazing thing to know that this conversation is happening that way. And of course, we've said this before, but it seems really true to me that the conversation is not, of course, just the conversation between you and me, Lizzie. It's the conversation that happens between us and everyone who's listening. But I think even more importantly, between the different parts of each of us speaking and each of us listening. So there's an internal conversation that gets born of this, and then all the conversations with other people that happen because of what happened in this conversation. So it's very that the way this conversation can land in the world is much wider and deeper than the if you would sort of count the number of people who were listening in total. It's way bigger than that, and that's true of every conversation everyone has. It's not something that's unique to Turning Towards Life. It's that's the nature of conversations, is that they reach, what we say and how we listen reaches into the world way beyond us. And it's a reminder to me that we don't end where our bodies end, that it's much richer and much more complex and deeper than that. So and it's real joy. I was also thinking whilst you were speaking that even collecting the almost 170 or so different sources into a book or something would be quite a rich thing, even without the conversations. And to say to anyone who's listening, you can find all the sources on. You can either come to our Facebook group, which is Turning Towards Life, just search for us and ask to join. But you can also find them and all the recordings of the conversations on whatever podcast app you use, but also on turningtowards.life, where you can actually go and browse through all of the weeks and just read. If you want to just read the sources like this one and follow them up, you can do. And this one is from an amazing book called Letters to a Young Poet by the poet Rainer Maria Rilke, who at the time this book was written was already very well known. And a young man wrote to him with very big and deep questions about how to live and how to live the life of a poet. And Rilke wrote back, and his letters are amazing. And this part of it jumped out at me, I suppose, because it's a big and ongoing question for my life is exactly this. So we'll do the ordinary thing, Lizzie, which is I'll read it and you'll read it and then we'll talk about it. If we adjust our life to the principle which advises us that we must always attach ourselves to what is difficult, then that which now still appears to us most strange will become our most familiar and loyal friend. How can we forget that old myth which is to be found at the beginning of all peoples, the myth of the dragon, which at the last moment changes into a princess? Perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us act just once with beauty and courage. Perhaps everything that frightens us is, in its deepest essence, something helpless that wants our love. So you must not be frightened if a sadness rises up before you larger than any you have ever seen, if a restiveness like light and cloud shadows passes over your hands and over all you do. You must think that something is happening with you, that life has not forgotten you, that it holds you in its hand. It will not let you fall. Why do you want to shut out of your life any uneasiness, any miseries, or any depressions? For after all, you do not know what work these conditions are doing inside you.
If we adjust our life to the principle which advises us that we must always attach ourselves to what is difficult, then that which now still appears to us as most strange will become our most familiar and loyal friend. How can we forget that old myth, which is to be found at the beginning of all peoples, the myth of the dragon, which at the last moment changes into a princess? Perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us act just once with beauty and courage. Perhaps everything that frightens us is, in its deepest essence, something helpless that wants our love. So you must not be frightened if a sadness rises up before you, larger than any you have ever seen, if a restiveness like light and cloud shadows passes over your hands and over all you do. You must think that something is happening with you, that life has not forgotten you, that it holds you in its hand and will not let you fall. Why do you want to shut out of your life any uneasiness, any miseries, any depressions? For after all, you do not know what work these conditions are doing inside you.
Thanks, Lizzie. When I was reading this a few times over the past few days, one of the things I realized is that very often I imagine that what I'm frightened of is outside of me. Like, I'm frightened of this happening, and I'm frightened of that happening, and I'm frightened of this person, and I'm frightened about what will happen in politics, and I'm frightened about climate change, and I'm frightened about. But I think it's actually more accurate to say that, first of all, what I'm frightened of is something inside me. That it's not so much the thing. There are many things that I care about, that I want to do things about because they matter. But very often when I'm in the middle of needing to do something about something, that's not fear, that's something else is in play. And in all of the rest of the time when I'm frightened about what it will feel like to be in this or that situation, or whether I'll be able to cope with it, or sometimes whether I'll be able to deal with the loss of something, like the loss of someone's good regard, or the loss of a friendship, or the loss of something I own, or I won't be able to tolerate shame when it comes, or whatever. And so it's just been so illuminating for me to find out that the first place that I'm frightened is of an inner dynamic, not the outer something. And that's been really, I got helped to this by reading Rilke. It's been absolutely revelatory to see that, because it seems to me it allows, at least for me, the first step of what Rilke is talking about. So I can't say that something like the rise of hate speech is something helpless that wants my love. I'm not sure I've quite got to that part. But where I can begin is what happens in me when I worry about what will happen about people being cruel and violent to one another, or to me, or to people I love. That's inside me. And I know that what happens for me very easily when fear comes on me that way is I shrink, or I flee, or I've got 100,000 different strategies for avoiding encountering anything about it. I very quickly get into thinking things through over and over and over and over and over again. That's one of my strategies. So what a gift it is, Lizzie, to see that, to start instead to go a different way, which is to go, I am afraid, number one. And number two is, this dragon that I'm experiencing is not a dragon in the sense that I'm experiencing it. It's a possibility waiting to be born. And often I think Rilke is exactly accurate when I let myself feel into what the something inside me actually feels like. And at the same time, if I let myself feel my bigness and my way that I'm held by life and all of that, then it really does often seem to me that what's there is something really, really tiny and desperate that has not had my attention. And the tiny desperate thing in me that has not had my attention is it's the presence of that, and my relationship with it, my continual pushing away of it, that floods me with all of the feelings of terror, and my own helplessness is not my helplessness, it's the helplessness of this part of me that is really longing to be welcomed. So what a thing it is for Rilke to invite us in this beautiful way into what's happening here is something in us that is longing. It's a longing, is longing to be held, and is longing to be seen, is longing, and is calling on us to act with beauty and courage. Oh my, it's a whole different direction to turn.
Yeah, listening to you, I'm reflecting on how it seems like when there's a fear response, like I'm frightened of something, so often there's a kind of bouncing off it that happens. Like we kind of touch it a little bit and then we just do something to not have that happen anymore. Like, I don't want that. I don't like it. It's too hard, whatever our response might be, but just to get away from it, to do something, to numb out, to hide, to avoid, to stop doing the thing that's creating the fear. And it's such a different way to respond, to stay right there and to gently edge into whatever it is, which I think this is an invitation for at the beginning, about when Rilke talks about that which now still appears to us most strange will become our most familiar and loyal friend. Feeling into the possibility of that, like the thing that I'm most afraid of, and I'm really with you, Justin, about the inner experience of the words that were coming to me was like, what if I can't handle it? That's one of my biggest things. So how do I hedge everything or like off, move everything around, manipulate everything so that I don't have to experience the thing I'm frightened of experiencing? And I think I'm doing that in all kinds of sophisticated ways that I probably don't even see that I'm doing. And then this offering that we might turn towards instead of away, and that we might gently, kindly see that there is something helpless that wants our love in that moment. How different a life that might be. And I know that that's true for myself, but I think it's also true when we're supporting anyone, whether it's in parenting or being in a relationship or being a friend or a colleague or a neighbor, to be someone who stands there and accepts the difficulty, accepts the fear, welcomes it, and is willing to be open-eyed and open-hearted about that, feels like what we need. Like, we really need this. When I think of my little 1-year-old, Vesper, for me to create a life for her where everything is just fine is like stealing from her in this narrative. So for me to arrange everything so that she doesn't have to experience difficulty or pain or emotional upset or rejection or whatever, if I'm continuously kind of hedging everything away from her, she might be missing this kind of beauty, this kind of loyal friendship to the parts of her that are going to have to be part of her. Like, we can't get rid of all of this. We can't remove parts of human experience because we don't like it. It doesn't work like that. And so who do we become when we allow and we welcome and we let our nervous systems be expanded enough to be with whatever's here? And it feels like such an invitation to us. And of course, it feels like to me that this has to begin here with us. Like, if I'm not able to be with my sadness and have a way of welcoming it in my life, when you're really sad and you're with me, and all I can do is fly away from my sadness, all I'll do is try and take you away from yours, because that's all I know how to do. So the work really starts here with us, that we can accept and welcome our experience, whatever that is, so that we can then be that for others as well. And what a gift, given that really all of us just have helpless somethings that want us to love them. And if I can love a helpless something of yours a little bit before you can love a helpless something of yours, maybe that's the thing that helps you love the helpless something of yours. And I think that happens all the time. I think we do this for each other all the time. Like, someone comes to us with something really horrible and difficult, and we listen. That act of listening is that loving of the helpless something. And so I'm just thinking of the ways that we practice, Justin, and that we listen to each other, and which happens in various pieces of our work and stuff. And just the listening part feels like a huge act of love. A huge act of turning towards something is to listen to it and just be quiet. Be quiet, be present, be open, be welcoming, have a open front that says, yes, keep talking, keep telling me things. What you just said might be the most horrific, shameful thing for you, but I'm here and my face is still open and my eyes are open and I'm not wincing. I'm right here. And so if that's what we can do for ourselves and others, it's a really different life. Instead of all these parts of us that get kind of shoved under the carpet, that aren't welcome in places because of the reactions that they get from people. And of course, we were all just babies once, so we just learned, oh, that needs to go under the carpet, that needs to go down there. This is okay. My family smile at me and laugh when I do a dance, but they don't smile and laugh when I have really difficult feelings. They ignore me and they push me away and they shame me or whatever happens. So we've learned all of this really deeply in our wherever we've come from. And maybe the story that I can see in this moment is that for each other we're the great undoing of so much, so that it doesn't all have to be under the carpet anymore. And when you got a lot of stuff under the carpet, you start to begin to walk rather wonkily. You know, it's really hard to feel the ground when there's so much stuff under the carpet. We need to have a flat surface to walk on to feel the ground and to feel our solidity in life. And really that feels like a really important narrative to live by. Like, how do I de-wonkify my carpet and help you de-wonkify your carpet at the same time?
The most fantastic metaphor. I'm really struck by this point you're making about who we get to be for one another, and that there's something so beautiful about. I mean, everything. I love every word in this piece of Rilke, but the part that's catching my attention is, so you mustn't be frightened if a sadness rises up for you, larger than any you've ever seen. You must think that something is happening with you, that life has not forgotten you, that it holds you in its hand. And it occurred to me whilst you were talking about who we are for one another, that the dynamic that happens in each of us is we get frightened in the way that Rilke says when an experience comes, maybe exactly because you said often because we've learnt that experience is not welcome. We've learnt that where we grew up, and we've learnt that from the families we were in, inevitably, because some things are welcome and some things aren't. And one way we can be with one another. And so when that happens, what we do is we contract away from life. So I really get this with me. I get afraid, and very quickly what comes up for me is thinking about all the things I haven't done that I must do, where I've fallen short. And I can think that my thinking has got something to do with the fear, that's what I'm afraid of, but it's not. It's just a way of getting away from the fear. So I can feel it as a great big contraction out of my own bodily experience, often away from relationship. It's like gone. And when we're with one another, we have a choice about, are we going to join in contracting away from life? Mm-hmm. Or are we going to welcome one another back into life? And that's why the sentence from Rilke is so extraordinary, because this is exactly what he says, is that when we let ourselves be in contact with the experience of even of a sadness larger than I've ever seen, the thing to do is remember is that life has not forgotten me, I am in life. Mm. And we can go a really long way with one another to be allied with the inner forces of contraction away from life, or to be giant loving welcomes to one another. And what you said about, I'm still here, whatever's happening for you. I'm open, my face is open, my heart is open, I'm right here with you, is the move that so many of us long for. And said another way, the parts of us that got put under the rug really long for. And those are the things that I think are the something helpless that wants our love. And the dynamic is really like that. We feel the presence of something helpless that wants our love. We get afraid, we contract away from it. And then if we're not paying attention, we help other people to contract away from it ourselves. And then the helpless parts of ourselves that really want our love and the helpless parts of others are there hidden away in the darkness, longing. And I found this out really strikingly this week when I've been doing lots of wondering about my fear and different ways of coming at it. And one of the things I've started to do is to see if I can catch myself in the act of thinking myself away from fear and instead going, those are just thoughts about fear. What's happening here is, oh, there's fear here, which is the first step. And when I was very, very quiet earlier in the week and I let myself listen to and talk with the very frightened part of myself, what I heard that part of me saying was, I'm here to frighten you so you don't get sad. And that when I got onto that, that felt so true, that there's a very, very small, helpless, frightened part of me that has dedicated itself for as long as I can remember to making sure that another part, which is even more tender, that is really sad, doesn't come into the light. And I think that there I can see, if I look at the intergenerational history of my own family, I can see lots of reasons why sadness, as in many families, the sadness was so overwhelming, so giant, that it makes sense that what happened was the people went, let's not have this be present. Let's have that right out of the way. But Lizzie, to see that the fear, which can sometimes feel overwhelming, is actually something, some part of me that is really helpless and has dedicated itself to making sure that something else doesn't happen, is so moving. And it allows for the possibility that whatever I is, that is so much wider and deeper than the frightened parts and the sad parts could be big enough and courageous enough, bring enough courage and beauty to say, I hear you, frightened part, and I really appreciate what you've been trying to do, but I'm here and I can feel sad. And let's find out what it's like to be really sad together, to have a sadness larger than I've ever seen. Let's find out what that is to do together. And that's kind of how I've got onto this. I'm not really frightened of the thing outside me. That's not what's going on most of the time.
Yeah. Well, it's really moving, Justin, feeling into the way that our parts relate to each other, and that there are so many ways that our inner world is made of selves that are doing jobs, really good jobs of protecting us from certain things and allowing certain things. But as you were speaking, I was realizing that if you don't talk to those parts, you might never know what it is that they're up to. Like, we might just keep bouncing away from something again and again without saying, hold on a second, I'm not going to keep bouncing away from this thing. I'm just going to see if there's a conversation to be had here. You know, when I'm afraid, what's really happening? What fearful part? What's your job? What do you need? What do you like? This turning towards the something helpless in the loving act of listening and speaking. Just kind of, yeah, it just makes me wonder about the kind of depth that we're not broadly living at in life, which really need to that we really need to cultivate this kind of depth of contact with the reactions that we have, the reactivity that we are, the self-protection that we are. We need to talk more to those responses to life that seem to be patterns. You know when you can see something coming again and again and again and again, it's like, hold on, I need to stop and talk and stop and acknowledge and deepen into what that is. Otherwise, we're just a series of same old suffering happening again and again. And it's horrible. I know for myself that the things that keep coming back, there's the thing itself, but the fact that it keeps coming back is also part of the pain. It's part of the horror of certain things where you think, my God, I can't believe this is still here. And I'm this old and I've done this much work, and so it just feels like a really moving thing to wander into each of these parts being a self, each of these parts being just as important as you are to me, for example. Like if I could consider each of my parts like a sacred person that I want to talk to, whatever it looks like, whatever they look like, I wonder what life would be like. So it feels really inviting, and I feel very gentle about it as well. There's a gentleness that's come over me in the conversation of like, I think energetically how to treat parts. So how would I humbly sit with fear, respectfully sit with my fear and say, what are you up to? How are you? What do you need? What are you protecting me from? And the thing that arises just in this moment when I ask that question is something to do with, I have a particular dynamic of being really afraid of how much I love people. And so I find myself catastrophizing and have to really discipline myself to come back to some kind of normal thinking, normal ground. And in those moments, it's normally quite close to feeling very loving. So I think my fear takes me away because that intensity, it feels like too much, or like I'm not going to be able to handle the way that I feel or the way that I love. And so I have to have some catastrophizing pattern that protects me from that catastrophic thinking part. Really does protect me from a kind of tenderness that I can already feel the ache now in my heart as I'm talking. It really sears to feel the lovingness. And so, of course, all the times I'm kind of in some bonkers world of horrificness and thinking, what if that happened, and what if that happened, and what if that happened? Maybe that's a part that's a protector part that stops me from having to be seared, stripped raw, and like exposed to what love and attachment feels like. So I'm feeling very moved by softening into that wondering, and really, really glad to be encountering this feeling.
I'm very moved too, Lizzie, and as a closing thought, I don't know if this is true for everybody, but it really feels true for me as you speak and talk about yourself, that I can feel how there are parts of me which would much rather that I was afraid than I felt too much of anything else, particularly grief. And the consequence of love is grief, because everything and everyone we love will lose. I was sitting on the sofa last night with Davina and a couple of our children snuggled up, and we were watching a film together, and maybe because I've been wondering about this for a while, I let myself touch in to the feeling of how much I love them, and also that this won't be forever. And for a while, the very, very frightened part that does everything it can to stop me from ever really feeling that was quiet and held. And it was very powerful and very moving to let myself feel it. And I'd rather live that way than to live protected by feeling afraid all the time. And of course, we do this with one another. It's the way to do this is to do this where we can with loving others who will hear us talk about all of this that we're talking about now, and who will stay with us and not try to go, oh, no, it's okay, you're wrong, you don't have to think about any of that, you don't have to feel any of that. So I'm very, very glad to have this conversation in which to feel these things and to talk about them, and to be here with you, Lizzie, and then also to be surrounded by circles and circles of others who are also in this conversation with us. So we've reached the end of our time for today. It's been wonderful to feel lots and to laugh together, as we often do. So thank you so much, Lizzie, and thank you, everyone. And we are planning on being here again, as we have done for 160 something weeks. We're planning on being here again next Sunday morning, either live on Facebook or on our podcast. And we'll see you then.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.